Visibilidad. Visibilidad, una hermana obligada de la representación y la presencia en nuestras sociedades actuales. Sobre ella dice Johanna Schaffer, cito, Sichtbarkeit ist in den letzten 3 Jahrzehnten zu einer zentralen Kategorie oppositioneller politischer Rhetoriken aufgestiegen. Es wird oft davon ausgegangen, dass mehr Sichtbarkeit auch mehr politische Präsenz, mehr Durchsetzungsvermögen und mehr Zugang zu den Strukturen der Privilegienvergabe bedeutet. Sichtbar machen bedeutet hier zuallererst die Forderung nach Anerkennung einer gesellschaftlichen und gesellschaftlich relevanten, das heißt mit Rechten und politischer, gesellschaftlicher Macht ausgestatteten Existenz. This proposal follows the impulse of comparing and applying the ideas above presented to the Viennese scene. Strategien der Sichtbarkeit ist eine Rauminstallation, bestehend aus der vollständigen Auflistung der Künstlerinnen und Künstler, die in Ausstellungen im Museum moderner Kunst Stiftung Ludwig Wien, mumok, zwischen 1998 und 2018 teilgenommen haben. Dieser Zeitraum umspannt das Jahrzehnt vor der weltweiten Finanzkrise 2008 und das danach. Auf den Auflistungen sind die Namen der teilnehmenden Künstlerinnen markiert, die Namen der Künstlerinnen des globalen Nordens in Blau, der Künstlerinnen des globalen Südens in Rot und die Namen der Künstler in Schwarz. Strategien der Sichtbarkeit vergleicht die Proportionen der Teilnahme für jedes Geschlecht mit einem Stern. For these categories, I considered as belonging to the global north not only artists that were born in the north, but also the ones that lived in or studied there. What empirical analysis still need to discuss more in detail is the fact that the diasporic element in the career of artists from the global south living in the north implies a whole different set of life conditions that differ radically from the ones of artists whose roots and network have always been located in the north. The experience of diasporic artists in the north is one of the south within the north, and is referred by Boaventura de Sousa Santos in the form of the excluded, silenced, and marginalized populations. Auf der anderen Seite, die systematische Unterrepräsentation von Frauen im Kunstfeld ist bekannt. Dies führt zu einem verarmten, von Männern dominierten kunsthistorischen Kanon. In Strategien der Sichtbarkeit stellen die Auflistungen diese Unterrepräsentation von Frauen unmittelbar sinnlich und räumlich dar. Female with a star. There is a lack of a stable subject in feminism, and there is an inevitable refusal to accept the category of the female as discussed by North American gender theorist Judith Butler. According to Butler, women, even in the plural, has become a troublesome term, a site of contest, a cause for anxiety. Regarding the disappearance of the female as a stable category, I think of Ella Shohat and Robert Stem, who think, doesn't it seem funny that at the very point when women and people of color are ready to sit down at the bargaining table with the white boys, that the table disappears? That is, suddenly there are no grounds for claims to truth and knowledge anymore. And here we are, standing in the conference room, making all sorts of claims to knowledge and truth, but suddenly without a table upon which to put our papers and coffee and cups, let alone to bang our fists. For people of color, the subject at hand is similarly a category to decolonize. Deskolonial. Wie kann diese Situation aus den postkolonialen und intersektionalen Diskursen der Repräsentation von Frauen betrachtet werden? Maria Lugones argues that gender itself is a colonial introduction, a violent introduction consistently and contemporarily used to destroy peoples, cosmologies, and communities as the building ground of the civilized West. For Lugones, decolonizing gender is necessarily a practical task. Yuderquis Espinosa Miñoso's position conveys that women of color are excluded from the general categories thanks to the existence of certain hierarchical differences within the groups, such as race, gender, class, and sexuality, that act excluding the other, producing a silence and an absence. In her words, quote, "The categories of gender and race do not contain and deny the experiences of women of color." End of quote. Contact zones. Strategies of visibilization shows this way the very thin contact zone or encounter of periphery with the center. These are the spaces left to voices and visions. This is participations in exhibitions in the mumok of women of the Global South. These are the names in red. Mary Louise Pratt defines contact zones as the social spaces where disparate cultures meet, clash, and grapple with each other, often in a highly asymmetrical relations. End of quote. Maria do Mar Castro Varela calls these contact zones third spaces. These spaces are battlegrounds where new forms of cohabitation question the societal norm. Lourdes Torres understands the spirit of the work of Gloria Saldúa and Cherry Moraga, "This Bridge Called My Back," in the following way, quote, "Texts appropriate a new space for Latinas. They theorize a politics from which to forge the survival of Latinas and other women of color." Here, the act of writing can be equal to the ones of producing visual culture. It is described by Grada Quilomba as an act of becoming. Quote, "While I write, I become the narrator, the describer, and the writer of my own history. I become the absolute opposition of what the colonial project has predetermined. I am the author and the authority of my own reality." The idea that one has to write, almost as a virtual moral obligation, also reminds us of the very many spaces where we are voiceless, spaces we usually cannot enter and which have to be, in terms of bell hooks, interrupted, appropriated, and transformed through artistic and literary practice. This approach is a starting point in the search for dynamics of mediation in the art field. In this respect, it is necessary to analyze positioning, privileges, relations of power and representation, or in words of Hito Style, why shouldn't the cultural institution be at least as representative as parliamentary democracy? Why shouldn't it include, for example, women in its canon if women were at least in theory accepted in parliament? To which I would add, why shouldn't the cultural institution include women of the Global South in its canon? In the same direction of the work of Jules Tierler, I take into consideration the fact that in recent years, racist, nationalist, right-wing populist, and right-wing extremist discourses have gained visibility. This endangers the consolidation of a pluralistic national identity. Bourdieu's ideas on the fundamental role of the dominant culture in the construction of national self-image and national identity, and the debates on positioning, power relations, and representation in museological practices gain relevance in this context, especially in the exercise of looking back and projecting forward beyond nationalism and narrow definitions, as pointed out by Cecilia Fajardo Gil and Marcela Guerrero. Die Analyse der Daten über Teilnahme an Mumok-Ausstellungen trägt auch zu Debatten über Verlust, Trauer und Wiedergutmachung im Kontext der verweigerten Positionen von Frauen im Kunstfeld bei. Die Installation und die Analyse machen die Unsichtbarkeit von Künstlerinnen und vor allem von Künstlerinnen des globalen Südens sichtbar.